The stench of burning adamantium still clings to my nostrils from the day I first witnessed what happens when fantasy meets the grim darkness of the far future. My name is Magos Tolkienus, former explorator of the Adeptus Mechanicus, and I have seen what becomes of peaceful realms when they face the endless war of the 41st millennium. You think the destruction of the Shire makes me a heretic, but you don't know what I discovered in the ruins of Isengard's adamantium spires. I was there when the Imperium's 847th Expeditionary Fleet made first contact with what we catalogued as primitive feudal world designation, Middle-earth. The Omnissiah preserved me. I thought we were bringing enlightenment to another backward planet. Instead, I learned that some worlds possess something far more dangerous than technology, hope itself. This is my testimony of what happened when infinite war met infinite courage. Chapter 1. First Contact Protocol. The cogitator banks of the Eternal Vigil hummed with the familiar rhythm of Imperial efficiency as our fleet emerged from the warp above the third planet of the Arda system. Standard Imperial doctrine demanded immediate assessment. Population centers, technological level, military capability, and compliance potential. What we found defied every parameter in our databases. Magos, Servitor Scribe designation, Gamma 77 intoned through its Vox grill. Surface scans detect approximately 2 million humanoid life forms across the primary continent. Technology assessment, primitive metallurgy, agricultural basis, no detected void capabilities. I manipulated the holodisplay with mechadendrite precision, studying the surface topology. Rivers carved silver lines through impossibly green landscapes. Mountain ranges jutted skyward in perfect geometric beauty that suggested natural formation, rather than the scarred battlefields I was accustomed to analyzing. Most remarkably, the atmospheric readings showed no trace of industrial pollution, no radiation signatures, no chemical weapon residue. Impossible, I whispered through my Vox unit. No world maintains such environmental purity without advanced atmospheric processes. Tech Adept Ferrum stepped forward, his augmetic eye whirring as it focused on the display. Perhaps they achieved ecological balance through lost archaeotech, Magos. The dark age of technology produced many wonders we no longer comprehend. The possibility intrigued my analytical circuits. I had spent 3 centuries cataloguing lost technologies across the galaxy's rim, but this world exhibited characteristics I had never encountered. No energy signatures consistent with archaeotech. No orbital installations. No void shields protecting population centers. Yet the bio-readings showed a thriving ecosystem that should have been impossible on any inhabited world. Begin detailed surface reconnaissance, I commanded. Deploy advanced survey teams to primary population centers. Standard compliance assessment protocols. Within 6 hours, our Aquila landers had touched down at coordinates corresponding to major settlements. The initial reports filtered back through Vox channels, each more perplexing than the last. Magos, this is Reconnaissance Team Alpha. We have visual confirmation of structures that defy architectural classification. Target settlement designated Minas Tirith displays stonework of impossible precision. No mortar joints detected. Construction methods unknown. I leaned forward, mechadendrite fingers dancing across control interfaces. Elaborate, Team Alpha. Are you detecting gravitic manipulation? Molecular assemblers? Negative, Magos. No energy signatures whatsoever. The stone appears to have been shaped by hand tools, yet the precision exceeds anything our most advanced servo skulls could achieve. The contradiction struck at the core of my understanding. Advanced construction techniques required advanced technology. Advanced technology left energy signatures. This world showed neither yet displayed both. My logic circuits sparked with the strain of processing the paradox. Team Beta reporting from target designation, Rivendell, crackled another Vox transmission. Magos, you need to see this. The inhabitants, they don't age normally. Explain. Bioscans indicate individuals with cellular structures, suggesting lifespans measuring in millennia. Not through rejuvenate treatments or genetic enhancements. The aging process appears naturally delayed. I felt the familiar surge of excitement that accompanied significant discoveries. Extended lifespans through natural evolution represented a biological impossibility according to Imperial genetic doctrine. Yet the data streams flowing into my cogitators painted an undeniable picture. Team Gamma, positioned at target designation Isengard, came a third report. Magos, we're detecting industrial capabilities, forges, metallurgy operations, weapons production. But the energy sources, they're burning organic matter. Trees, Magos, they're burning trees for industrial power. The inefficiency calculations made my machine spirit recoil. Tree-based fuel sources represented the most primitive energy generation possible, barely sufficient for basic metallurgy. Yet the quality of metalwork visible in their transmission feeds exceeded standard Imperial Guard equipment specifications. I initiated a private comm channel to Admiral Kastner aboard the flagship Iron Doctrine. Admiral, initial reconnaissance reveals unprecedented anomalies. This world operates outside known technological paradigms. Kastner's gravelly voice carried the weight of 40 years, commanding compliance operations. Magos, I don't care if they're using psychic powers to grow their buildings. Standard protocol applies. If they can't join the Imperium, they get classified as a potential threat. Respectfully, Admiral, I require additional time for proper analysis. This world may contain archaeotech beyond our current understanding. You have 72 hours for your investigation, Magos. Then we begin standard compliance procedures. The transmission cut, leaving me alone with the flood of incoming data. My servitors compiled reports at inhuman speed, but each new piece of information deepened the mystery rather than resolving it. Survey Team Delta had encountered what they described as walking trees, massive humanoid plant forms capable of speech and apparently sentient thought. Impossible according to xenobiology parameters, yet recorded on multiple Auspex readings. Team Epsilon reported contact with diminutive humanoids dwelling in underground tunnels of impossible complexity, yet showing no signs of advanced digging equipment or structural support technology. Most disturbing of all, Team Zeta had attempted to scan what locals called the One Ring, a simple gold band that registered massive psychic emanations comparable to minor warp artifacts, yet showed no chaos corruption signatures. I spent the next 18 hours in direct interface with the ship's cogitator arrays, attempting to correlate the impossible data streams. Standard Imperial classification systems could not accommodate a world that operated on fundamentally different physical principles. Yet everything our instruments detected was real, measurable, and consistently anomalous. The breakthrough came when I began analyzing the linguistic patterns in intercepted local communications. The languages showed development patterns suggesting continuous cultural evolution over periods measuring in tens of thousands of years. No galactic civilization maintained such linguistic stability without advanced record-keeping technologies. Yet these populations showed no signs of any technology beyond basic metallurgy. Unless my analytical circuits sparked with a new hypothesis. What if this world represented something the Imperium had never encountered? A civilization that had achieved stability not through technology, but through something else entirely. I initiated deep scan protocols on the population centers, focusing not on technological signatures, but on psychic emanations. The results froze my motor functions for 3.7 seconds. The entire planet resonated with psychic energy of a type I had never encountered. Not chaos corruption. The readings showed none of the chaotic fluctuations associated with warp taint. Instead, the energy patterns displayed an almost crystalline stability, as if the very fabric of reality around this world had been calmed. Impossible, I vocalized through my external speakers. Yet the data streams were undeniable. I opened a priority channel to Admiral Kastner. Admiral, I'm transmitting preliminary findings. This world operates under psychic stabilization of unprecedented scope and power. Explain in Gothic, Magos. Are they psychers or not? Unknown, Admiral. The psychic emanations suggest capabilities beyond standard psyker classification, yet show no signs of warp corruption or chaos influence. Something is actively maintaining reality stability across the entire planetary surface. The silence stretched for nearly a full minute. When Kastner's voice returned, it carried the hard edge of a man who had seen too many worlds burn. Magos, are you telling me this entire planet is some kind of psychic anomaly? Initial evidence suggests affirmative, Admiral. However, the implications are that we've found either the greatest treasure or the greatest threat in this sector. Continue your investigation, but prepare contingency protocols for both scenarios. As the transmission ended, I felt the weight of discovery settling around my augmented consciousness. After 3 centuries of cataloguing the Imperium's endless expansion, I had found something genuinely unprecedented. A world that had achieved what the Emperor's own vision had failed to accomplish. Lasting peace maintained through pure will and hope, rather than force and technology. The question that would haunt my remaining hours was simple. Could such a world survive contact with the grim darkness of the 41st millennium? Or would the Imperium's arrival destroy the very thing that made it remarkable? My sensors detected the first Aquila landers preparing for expanded reconnaissance missions. Soon, larger Imperial forces would make direct contact with the local populations. The peaceful world below had no idea that their greatest test was about to begin. In my private cogitation chambers, I began composing what I suspected might become either a celebration of humanity's greatest discovery or its most tragic loss. Chapter 2. The Gathering Storm. The first official contact occurred at precisely 1432 Imperial Standard Time at the settlement designated Idorus. Captain Thaddeus Grimm of the 847th Expeditionary Forces Advance Guard approached the wooden gates mounted on his command Rhino, flanked by 2 squads of Astra Militarum in full battle array. Standard Imperial protocol demanded an overwhelming display of technological superiority to ensure swift compliance. What happened next would be analysed in Mechanicus archives for millennia. According to Grimm's after-action report, transmitted to the fleet 6 hours later, the inhabitants of Idorus responded to the arrival of Imperial armour not with fear, but with curiosity. An elderly man wearing nothing more advanced than woven cloth and bearing only a wooden staff approached the Rhino without hesitation. "I am Theoden, King of the Mark," the figure announced in fluent Low Gothic, somehow learned through methods our linguistic cogitators could not identify. "You are welcome in my halls, travellers from the void. We have been expecting you." Captain Grimm, veteran of 17 compliance campaigns, found himself utterly unprepared for hospitality rather than resistance. His Vox transmission to Admiral Kastner carried audible confusion. "Admiral, the natives are inviting us to dinner." What followed challenged every assumption in Imperial contact doctrine. The inhabitants of Idorus possessed complete knowledge of galactic civilization, despite having no astropathic communications, no space travel capability, and no detectable information networks. When questioned about this impossible awareness, King Theoden offered an explanation that defied rational analysis. "The winds carry news to those who know how to listen," he said, gesturing toward the plains surrounding his city. "We have heard of your great empire among the stars, of its endless wars, of its struggle against the darkness. We know why you have come." I analyzed the bioscan data personally. Theoden registered as a baseline human with no psycho potential according to standard Imperial testing protocols. Yet somehow he possessed knowledge that should have been impossible for anyone not directly connected to the Imperium's communication networks. More disturbing still, he demonstrated awareness of information that was classified at the highest levels of Imperial command. He spoke knowledgeably of the Horus heresy, of the Emperor's current condition, of threats facing the Imperium that were known only to the highest echelons of the Adeptus Terra. "Your Emperor's sacrifice weighs heavily upon the galaxy," Theoden observed during the formal dinner he hosted for Captain Grimm's command staff. 10,000 years of suffering to hold back the darkness. We understand such burdens." When pressed for details about how he could possibly know such things, Theoden's answer sent chills through my augmented nervous system. "Sorrow calls to sorrow across any distance. Suffering recognizes suffering across any void. Your Emperor's pain echoes even here, in our peaceful realm." Similar encounters were occurring across the continent as Imperial contact teams made first approach to major population centers. In each case, local leaders demonstrated impossible knowledge and responded to Imperial arrival with neither fear nor aggression, but with what could only be described as compassionate understanding. At Minas Tirith, Lord Denethor spoke extensively with Major Helena Voss about the psychological cost of eternal vigilance, comparing his own burden of defending Gondor against the forces of Mordor to the Imperium's endless struggle against chaos, Xenos threats, and heretical rebellion. His insights into Imperial strategic doctrine were so precise that Major Voss initially suspected infiltration by Alpha Legion operatives. At Rivendell, the entity designated Lord Elrond provided detailed analysis of warp space navigation hazards that exceeded the knowledge of most navigator houses, despite having never left his planetary surface. When questioned about the source of his expertise, he simply observed, "We have long experience with the roads between worlds, though we have not walked them in this age." Most unsettling of all, every local leader expressed the same certainty. They knew the Imperium had not come in peace. "You have brought war to our shores," observed Aragorn, newly crowned King of Gondor, during his meeting with Colonel Marcus Steele. "Not by choice, perhaps, but war follows your ships as storm clouds follow the wind. We do not blame you for this. We understand that in your galaxy, peace is the aberration and conflict is the natural state." "How could you possibly know our operational intentions?" Colonel Steele demanded. "Our mission parameters are classified at segmentum level." Aragorn's response would later be quoted in dozens of administratum reports. "A realm that has fought 10,000 years of war cannot suddenly learn peace, any more than a river can suddenly flow uphill. Your empire has become war itself. It cannot exist without conquest, without enemies to fight, without new threats to overcome. We do not judge this. We simply prepare for what must come." The accuracy of local predictions began to manifest within the first week of Imperial presence. Despite explicit orders to maintain peaceful contact protocols, tensions escalated with disturbing inevitability. It began with standard Imperial survey operations. Geologicus teams detected significant mineral deposits throughout the mountain ranges, rare earth elements, promethium equivalents, and what appeared to be previously unknown crystalline formations with exotic properties. Standard Imperial doctrine demanded immediate resource assessment and extraction planning. The local populations received news of planned mining operations with resigned acceptance rather than resistance. This reaction puzzled Imperial commanders, who had prepared for everything except willing cooperation. "They're not fighting the mineral surveys," reported Surveyor Prime Hendricks during the morning briefing. "They're helping, showing us the richest deposits, explaining seasonal variations in extraction viability. It's like they want us to strip mine their world." What Imperial forces failed to understand was that the inhabitants of Middle-earth had learned, through millennia of experience, that resistance to overwhelming force only increased the severity of ultimate destruction. Their apparent cooperation was actually preparation for inevitable loss. The turning point came when explorator teams attempted to examine what locals called the Ents, the walking tree entities encountered by initial survey teams. Standard xenobiology protocols demanded specimen capture for analysis and potential integration into Imperial biotech projects. When the first Ent was tranquilized and loaded onto an Imperial transport, something changed in the planetary psychic emanations. The crystalline stability I had detected in initial scans began to show fracture patterns. Reality itself seemed to become less certain in areas surrounding Imperial operations. Trees throughout the continent began to show signs of distress that exceeded normal botanical responses. Rivers altered their courses overnight. Mountain peaks shifted position by measurable degrees. The very landscape appeared to be grieving. "Magos," reported Tech Adept Ferrum during an emergency consultation. "We're detecting unprecedented geological instability. Seismic activity has increased by 347% since the xenobiological capture operation. Gravitational field variations are approaching theoretical limits for planetary stability." I realized with growing horror that we had fundamentally misunderstood the nature of Middle-earth's peaceful civilization. Their harmony was not simply social or cultural, it was literally built into the physical structure of their world. The planet itself was a participant in their society, and it was beginning to reject Imperial presence. Admiral Kastner's response to my emergency briefing was predictably direct. "Magos, are you telling me this planet is somehow alive? The data suggests a level of integration between conscious beings and planetary systems that exceeds our models of possible symbiosis. The inhabitants haven't simply achieved peace with each other. They've achieved peace with their entire world. And our presence is disrupting that peace." Affirmative, Admiral. Our very existence here represents a contradiction their reality cannot accommodate indefinitely. The truth hit me with the force of revelation. The Imperium's greatest strength, its ability to impose order through superior force, was precisely what made it incompatible with a world that had achieved order through harmony. We weren't liberating or conquering Middle-earth. We were slowly killing it simply by being there. Local leaders had known this from the moment of our arrival. Their impossible knowledge, their resigned cooperation, their careful preparations. They weren't planning to fight us. They were planning to save what they could when their world inevitably shattered under the weight of Imperial presence. "The Elves speak of sailing west," King Aragorn explained to Colonel Steele when asked about population movements detected by orbital surveillance. "Some knowledge, some beauty, must be preserved beyond the reach of war. We do not flee from you. We flee from what your presence will make us become." That night, alone in my cogitation chambers, I ran probability calculations through the ship's most advanced analytical engines. Every scenario ended the same way. Imperial doctrine would eventually demand full compliance from Middle-earth. Full compliance would require the destruction of the very thing that made their civilization possible. A world built on hope and harmony could not survive absorption into an empire built on fear and force. The most tragic irony was that Middle-earth represented everything the Emperor's original vision had tried to achieve: unity without oppression, peace without stagnation, progress without destruction. It was humanity's greatest success story, and Imperial presence would inevitably turn it into another tragedy. As my sensors detected increased fleet activity in high orbit, I understood that my investigation time was running out. Admiral Kastner was preparing for the next phase of contact operations. Soon, peaceful reconnaissance would give way to active compliance procedures. I began documenting everything, not just for the Adeptus Mechanicus archives, but for posterity. Someone needed to record what Middle-earth had been before the Imperium showed them what humanity could become. Someone needed to preserve the memory of a world where war was not the natural state of existence. The question that haunted my remaining hours was no longer whether Middle-earth could survive the 40K universe. It was whether the 40K universe could survive discovering that another way was possible. Chapter 3. The Weight of Truth. The revelation struck me like a plasma discharge to my augmented consciousness during my 15th hour of continuous data analysis. Hidden within the seemingly peaceful interactions between Imperial forces and local populations lay a pattern so disturbing that my logical circuits initially rejected it as impossible. Middle-earth wasn't just aware of the Imperium's true nature, they were preparing to sacrifice their entire civilization to save it. The evidence had been accumulating across dozens of seemingly unrelated incidents. Elrond's detailed knowledge of warp space corruption wasn't academic curiosity. He was preparing defenses against chaos incursion. Galadriel's inquiries about Imperial technology weren't born of primitive wonder. She was calculating exactly how much their world could absorb before the fundamental harmony collapsed. Most telling of all, the entity designated Gandalf had requested detailed briefings on Imperial military doctrine, not to plan resistance, but to understand exactly how their destruction would unfold. "They're preparing to die," I vocalized to the empty cogitation chamber, my mechanical voice echoing off adamantium walls. "Not fight, not resist, die." The full scope of their plan crystallized as I integrated surveillance data from across the continent. Population movements weren't random evacuations. They were carefully orchestrated preservation efforts. The elves departing for the Grey Havens weren't fleeing in fear. They were systematically removing the most psychically sensitive elements of their society before Imperial presence could corrupt them. Underground, the dwarves were sealing their deepest halls and most sacred forges. Above ground, the Ents were systematically relocating to hidden groves where Imperial sensors couldn't detect them. Even the hobbits, seemingly the most naive of Middle-earth's inhabitants, were quietly documenting their cultural practices and hiding the records in locations our orbital scans would never find. They understood what Imperial compliance would require, and they were choosing controlled dissolution over forced transformation. My cogitators processed the tactical implications with growing admiration and horror. No conquered world had ever demonstrated such strategic prescience. Most populations resisted until overwhelming force crushed them, leaving only broken survivors to integrate into Imperial society. Others submitted immediately, allowing their cultures to be gradually subsumed by Imperial orthodoxy. Middle-earth was attempting something unprecedented: cultural euthanasia. They would dismantle their own civilization before the Imperium could destroy it, preserving what could be preserved, and allowing the rest to fade into memory, rather than be corrupted into something unrecognizable. The genius of their approach became clear when I analyzed Imperial response patterns. Admiral Kastner and his commanders were implementing standard compliance protocols designed for populations that either fought or submitted. They had no procedures for dealing with a civilization that was cooperatively self-destructing. Magos! Tech Adept Ferrum interrupted my analysis, his augmented voice carrying unusual hesitation. I'm receiving priority communications from Explorator Team's planet side. They're requesting immediate consultation on unusual phenomena. I established direct Voxlink with Explorator Prime Valdus, currently stationed at Isengard. His report defied classification. Magos, the local populations are teaching us their industrial techniques. Voluntarily, they're sharing metallurgical processes that exceed Imperial standard efficiency by margins I cannot calculate. Explain the impossibility, Explorator. They're achieving molecular-level precision in metalwork using nothing but hammer, anvil, and what they call the music of creation. No technology we can detect, no psychic enhancement we can measure, yet the results exceed what our most advanced servo skulls could accomplish. The implications struck my analytical circuits like an overload cascade. If their techniques could be integrated with Imperial technology, the manufacturing capabilities would revolutionize Mechanicus production across entire sectors. Yet something in Valdus's voice suggested deeper concerns. There's more, Magos. They're insisting we learn not just the techniques, but the philosophy behind them. They claim the methods won't work without understanding what they call harmony with the work. Our tech adepts are reporting unusual experiences during the learning process. Define unusual. They're developing emotional attachments to their work that exceed normal flesh weakness parameters, treating manufactured items as if they possess individual significance. Some are requesting permission to remain on-planet permanently to continue their studies. The corruption implications were staggering. Imperial doctrine taught that attachment to material objects led to technical heresy and potential chaos influence. Yet Middle-earth's approach suggested that some form of controlled attachment might actually enhance rather than compromise technical capability. I opened a priority channel to Admiral Kastner. Admiral, we have identified a potential technological integration opportunity of sector-wide significance. Elaborate, Magos. Local populations possess manufacturing techniques that could revolutionize Imperial production capabilities. However, successful integration requires extended cultural exposure that may compromise standard Imperial indoctrination protocols. The silence stretched long enough for me to cycle through 17 probability calculations. When Kastner's voice returned, it carried the weight of command decisions that would affect millions of lives. Magos, are you telling me these primitives have technology we need? Affirmative, Admiral. Their techniques suggest applications for everything from weapons manufacturing to void ship construction. However, The knowledge appears to be inseparable from their cultural and philosophical frameworks. Can it be extracted through standard interrogation procedures? My logical circuits sparked with conflicting imperatives. Truth demanded an honest answer. The knowledge could not be separated from its cultural context without losing effectiveness. Political necessity suggested a more palatable response that would minimize cultural contamination of Imperial personnel. I chose truth. Negative, Admiral. The techniques appear to require the adoption of local philosophical perspectives that would fundamentally alter Imperial personnel at a psychological level. Another long silence. Then, Magos, I'm ordering a full cultural analysis. I want to know exactly what we're dealing with before we make any strategic decisions. As the transmission ended, I realized I had just initiated the most comprehensive cultural study in Imperial history. Standard Imperial practice involved minimal cultural analysis before compliance operations. Understanding local customs was useful for tactical purposes, but detailed study was considered unnecessary and potentially corrupting. This would be different. Admiral Kastner was ordering the kind of deep cultural integration that had been forbidden since the early days of the Great Crusade. I began assembling the largest cultural analysis team in Explorator history. Anthropologists, theologians, xenopsychologists, even carefully selected members of the Ordo Hereticus, trained to identify dangerous ideas before they could spread. If the Imperium was going to fully understand Middle-earth, it would do so with unprecedented care and precision. The first detailed reports arrived within 48 hours, and they shattered every assumption about primitive human societies. Magos, reported anthropologist Prime Vera Sanctus, their governmental structures operate on principles of willing consent rather than imposed authority. Leaders rule not through force or divine mandate, but through demonstrated wisdom and personal sacrifice. The concept of unwilling obedience appears to be literally incomprehensible to them. Impossible. All human societies require coercive authority for basic stability. That's what our doctrine teaches, Magos. But the evidence here suggests otherwise. They've maintained planetary peace for over 3,000 years through systems based entirely on voluntary cooperation. The implications cascaded through my reasoning circuits. Imperial doctrine taught that human nature required authoritarian control to prevent chaos and destruction. The evidence from Middle-earth suggested that human nature could be fundamentally different under different social conditions. Theologian primate Lucius Devout provided equally disturbing insights. Magos, their religious practices center around what they call the music of creation, a concept suggesting that reality itself is fundamentally harmonious rather than conflicted. They believe that war, suffering, and death are temporary distortions of natural order, not permanent features of existence. Heretical implications? Unknown, Magos. Their theology predates Imperial doctrine by millennia, yet shows no signs of chaos corruption. If anything, their beliefs appear to provide active protection against warp-based corruption. Several of our team members report improved psychological stability after exposure to their philosophical frameworks. The most disturbing report came from Inquisitor Thalassa of the Ordo Hereticus. Magos, I was deployed to identify and contain dangerous ideas before they could influence Imperial personnel. Instead, I've discovered ideas that appear to strengthen rather than weaken resistance to chaos corruption. Their concept of hope isn't naive optimism. It's an active force that appears to stabilize local reality against warp intrusion. Explain the mechanism. Unknown, possibly unknowable using current Imperial analytical frameworks. They appear to have achieved something the Emperor himself attempted, the creation of genuinely incorruptible hope. That night, alone with the accumulated data, I faced a truth that would reshape my understanding of human potential. Middle-earth had achieved what the Imperium proclaimed impossible, a stable, peaceful, technologically advanced human civilization that had never required the brutal measures Imperial doctrine claimed were necessary for human survival. More than that, They had achieved it, not despite the presence of existential threats, but because of how they chose to face those threats. They had fought their own version of endless war against darkness and despair, and they had won not through superior firepower, but through superior hope. The question that haunted my calculations was no longer whether Middle-earth could survive contact with the 40K universe. It was whether the 40K universe could survive learning that everything it believed about human nature might be wrong. I began composing the most heretical report in Imperial history, a comprehensive analysis suggesting that the Imperium's foundational assumptions about human civilization were not only incorrect, but actively counterproductive to human flourishing. Somewhere in the depths of my augmented consciousness, I felt something I hadn't experienced in centuries of service to the Omnissiah. Doubt about whether the Imperium's way was actually the right way. As my sensors detected increased military activity throughout the fleet, I realized that my investigation was about to enter its most dangerous phase. Soon, cultural analysis would give way to political decision-making. The Imperium would have to choose between learning from Middle-earth or destroying the evidence that challenged its most fundamental beliefs. I suspected I already knew which choice they would make. Chapter 4. The Breaking Point. The crisis began at 0347 Imperial Standard Time when Servitor Monitor Station Delta 7 detected what appeared to be a localized reality distortion centered on the Grey Havens. Energy readings spiked beyond theoretical maximums, then dropped to absolute zero within 3.2 seconds. When orbital surveillance attempted to focus on the location, they found nothing. Not destruction, not evacuation, nothing. The Grey Havens had simply ceased to exist in any measurable sense. Magos! Admiral Kastner's voice carried barely controlled fury across the Vox channel. I want an immediate explanation for what just happened on the planet's surface. I cycled through the sensor data, my cogitators struggling to process readings that violated fundamental physical laws. Admiral, initial analysis suggests a controlled dimensional translation event. The Grey Havens appear to have been removed from normal space-time. Removed how? By whom? Are we dealing with Xenos technology? The truth was more disturbing than Xenos intervention. According to my calculations, the dimensional translation had been accomplished through pure psychic manipulation by the departing Elves, but psychic manipulation of a type completely unknown to Imperial doctrine. No warp space corruption, no demonic assistance, no chaos influence. Somehow, through sheer will and what they called the music of Arda, an entire population had simply left. Unknown, Admiral. The energy patterns suggest psyker involvement, but the signatures match nothing in our classification systems. The implications cascaded through Imperial command, like a virus through an unprotected cogitator network. If local populations possessed the ability to simply vanish when threatened, standard Imperial conquest doctrine became meaningless. How could the Imperium enforce compliance on a population that could literally remove itself from reality? More reports flooded in throughout the morning watch. The Ents had vanished from their forest groves, leaving behind only perfectly normal trees that showed no signs of ever having been sentient. The dwarf strongholds in the Lonely Mountain and the Blue Mountains had sealed themselves so completely that orbital bombardment couldn't detect their locations. Even the hobbits, seemingly the most vulnerable population, had implemented some kind of perception filter that made their settlements invisible to Imperial sensors, unless local guides provided exact coordinates. They're not fighting us, I reported during the emergency command conference. They're becoming impossible to fight. Colonel Marcus Steele, ground force commander, voiced the frustration of every Imperial officer. Magos, our entire tactical doctrine assumes enemies that remain in the same dimensional framework as our weapons. How do we enforce compliance on a population that can alter the fundamental nature of reality? The answer came from an unexpected source. Lord Aragorn, now the only major political leader remaining in measurable reality, requested a formal meeting with Admiral Kastner. The terms he proposed defied every principle of Imperial negotiation. He wanted to discuss surrender conditions, not for his own people, but for the Imperium. You misunderstand the situation. Aragorn explained during the face-to-face meeting aboard the Iron Doctrine. We are not attempting to resist your conquest. We are attempting to save you from the consequences of succeeding. Admiral Kastner, veteran of 100 compliance campaigns, found himself in entirely uncharted territory. Explain your meaning. Your empire has spent 10,000 years building a civilization based on the assumption that conflict is inevitable, that peace is temporary, that hope is naive. These assumptions have become so fundamental to your society that you cannot exist without them. But they are not true. Aragorn gestured toward the viewport, showing Middle-earth's surface below. Our world proves that human civilization can achieve permanent peace, genuine hope, lasting harmony. Not through superior technology or overwhelming force, but through choosing cooperation over competition, trust over suspicion, love over fear. Impossible. Human nature requires authoritarian control to prevent chaos. Human nature adapts to the expectations placed upon it. Your empire expects war, so it receives war. We expected peace, so we achieved peace. But you cannot learn our way while maintaining your way. The two approaches are fundamentally incompatible. The conversation that followed would be analyzed by Inquisition theologians for centuries. Aragorn laid out, with devastating logical precision, exactly why the Imperium's contact with Middle-earth would destroy both civilizations. If you attempt to impose your governmental structures on our people, you will destroy the social harmony that makes our technology possible. If you attempt to extract our techniques without understanding our philosophy, you will create corrupted versions that serve destruction rather than creation. If you attempt to integrate our knowledge into your military framework, you will transform tools of peace into weapons of war. Then what do you propose? Complete separation. We remove ourselves from your reality, and you remove yourselves from ours. Both civilizations survive, each in its proper sphere. Admiral Kastner's response embodied everything about Imperial doctrine that made such separation impossible. Unacceptable. Imperial law requires the integration of all human populations into the Imperium, no exceptions. Then you will destroy the greatest treasure your species has ever produced in order to maintain a law that serves no one. The meeting ended without resolution, but its consequences rippled through the Imperial fleet like a warp storm. For the first time in the Great Crusade's history, Imperial forces had encountered a human civilization that challenged not just Imperial authority, but the fundamental assumptions underlying that authority. In my private cogitation chambers, I ran continuous analytical cycles, attempting to identify a solution that would preserve both civilizations. Every calculation reached the same conclusion. Incompatible paradigms could not coexist indefinitely. Either Middle-earth would be absorbed and destroyed by Imperial doctrine, or Imperial doctrine would be questioned and potentially abandoned in favor of Middle-earth's approach. The Imperium could not risk the second possibility. I was conducting my final analysis when the priority alert reached my consciousness. Admiral Kastner had received new orders from Segmentum Command. The cultural investigation was terminated immediately. Standard compliance protocols would resume within 48 hours. Magos, Kastner explained during our final briefing. Segmentum Command has reviewed your reports and reached a determination. This world represents a potential ideological threat to Imperial stability. The population will be offered standard compliance terms. If they refuse, the planet will be classified as a rebellion world and dealt with accordingly. The clinical language couldn't disguise the reality. If Middle-earth couldn't be conquered and absorbed, it would be destroyed completely. Admiral, the loss of knowledge and technology would be irreplaceable. Magos, there are some prices too high to pay for knowledge. If integrating these people requires abandoning Imperial doctrine, then the knowledge isn't worth having. That night, I made a decision that would have been unthinkable during my 3 centuries of Imperial service. I opened a covert communication channel to the surface and transmitted a warning to the remaining population centers. The Imperium has decided, I informed King Aragorn through encrypted Vox transmission. You have 48 hours before full military action begins. Aragorn's response carried the weight of prophecy. "We know, Magos. We have been preparing since the moment your ships arrived. The question now is whether any part of our legacy will survive to remind the galaxy what humanity once achieved. What will you do? What we have always done when faced with inevitable destruction. We will save what can be saved, preserve what can be preserved, and let the rest pass into legend." The final 24 hours before Imperial compliance operations began showed Middle-earth's true measure. Rather than preparing for futile resistance, they orchestrated the most comprehensive cultural preservation effort in galactic history. Every song, every story, every technique, every philosophical insight was encoded into crystalline memory matrices and hidden in locations that existed partially outside normal space-time. The remaining populations didn't flee or fight. They systematically documented everything that made their civilization unique, and then prepared to surrender their lives to protect those records. Most remarkable of all, they began teaching Imperial personnel, not their techniques, which required cultural integration, but their history. Voluntary cultural ambassadors approached Imperial camps and offered to share the story of Middle-earth's development, its struggles against darkness, its ultimate victory over despair. "Why?" I asked Aragorn during our final communication. "Why preserve history for the very people who are about to destroy you?" His answer would haunt my remaining operational cycles. Because someday, perhaps in 1,000 years or 10,000, the Imperium will grow tired of endless war. When that day comes, they will need to remember that another way was possible. Our sacrifice today may become their salvation tomorrow. As Imperial forces prepared for planetary assault, I realized I was witnessing something unprecedented in galactic history. A civilization choosing to die for the hope that its ideals might eventually redeem its destroyers. The final phase of Operation Middle-earth was about to begin. Within hours, the most peaceful human civilization ever recorded would be reduced to memory and legend. I began transmitting my complete records to distant Mechanicus archives, knowing that someone needed to preserve the truth of what was about to be lost. If Middle-earth's hope was to survive, it would have to do so in the hidden archives of the very institution that destroyed it. The grim darkness of the far future was about to claim another victory over hope. But for the first time in my centuries of service, I wasn't certain which side was really winning. Chapter 5. The choice that changed everything. At 0600 Imperial Standard Time, as the first wave of Astra Militarum drop pods prepared for planetary assault, something unprecedented happened in the history of Imperial compliance operations. Admiral Kastner ordered a full tactical withdrawal, not a strategic repositioning, not a tactical delay, a complete cessation of military operations based on intelligence that challenged every assumption about Imperial doctrine and human nature. The intelligence came from my final cultural analysis report, a document so heretical that its mere existence constituted grounds for Inquisition investigation. Yet its conclusions were so thoroughly documented, so precisely reasoned, and so devastating in their implications that even Kastner's hard-earned pragmatism couldn't dismiss them. "Magos," Kastner's voice carried the weight of a man making the most difficult decision of his career. "Explain to me again why the complete destruction of this world would constitute a strategic defeat for the Imperium." I transmitted the core calculations directly to his personal cogitator array. "Admiral, Middle-earth represents proof that human civilization can achieve permanent stability without the authoritarian structures Imperial doctrine claims are necessary. If this evidence spreads throughout the Imperium, it could destabilize the fundamental assumptions that maintain Imperial unity. Meaning? Meaning that destroying this world would eliminate the evidence that challenges Imperial doctrine. Preserving it would require acknowledging that Imperial doctrine might be wrong. Kastner processed the implications with the tactical acumen that had earned him command of an expeditionary fleet. So we're faced with a choice between maintaining Imperial doctrine and learning a potentially superior alternative. Affirmative. Additionally, Admiral, the mathematical models suggest a third possibility that Imperial doctrine has never considered. Elaborate, controlled integration. Rather than destroying Middle-earth or attempting full absorption, we could establish it as a protected research zone, a living laboratory for studying alternative human development patterns. The concept violated every principle of Imperial expansion policy. The Imperium consumed and integrated, it didn't preserve and study, yet the strategic implications were undeniable. If Middle-earth's techniques could be understood and selectively applied, the Imperium could potentially achieve unprecedented technological advancement without destabilizing its social structures. You're suggesting we treat this world as, what? A nature preserve for alternative human civilization? Precisely, Admiral. With carefully controlled access for research purposes and absolute prohibition on cultural contamination in either direction. The silence that followed stretched for nearly 3 minutes, an eternity in military communication terms. When Kastner's voice returned, it carried the burden of a decision that would resonate through Imperial history. Magos, I'm classifying this world under Quarantine Protocols Ultima. All personnel will be withdrawn to orbital positions. The planet will be declared off-limits pending detailed review by Segmentum Command. The order sent shockwaves through the Imperial fleet. Quarantine Protocols Ultima had never been invoked for a human population. They were reserved for Xenos artifacts too dangerous to study but too valuable to destroy. Applying them to Middle-earth essentially acknowledged that human beings could develop in ways that made them alien to Imperial understanding. But Kastner wasn't finished. Magos, I'm also authorizing the establishment of Research Station Alpha in high orbit. Minimal staff, maximum security, long-term observation mandate. If this world represents something the Imperium needs to understand, we'll understand it properly. As the retreat orders propagated through the fleet, I found myself appointed as primary researcher for what would become the most classified project in Imperial history. The comprehensive study of human civilization operating outside Imperial paradigms. The establishment of Research Station Alpha required negotiations with Middle-earth's leadership that pushed Imperial diplomatic protocols beyond their design limits. How do you negotiate with a civilization that doesn't want anything you can offer and poses no threat you can counter? King Aragorn's proposals for coexistence defied every assumption about intergovernmental relations. Rather than demanding territorial sovereignty or resource rights, he suggested what he called parallel development protocols, systems that would allow both civilizations to exist in the same space without influencing each other. We understand your empire's need to expand and integrate, Aragorn explained during the orbital negotiations. We also understand that our existence challenges assumptions your empire cannot afford to question. We propose a solution that serves both our needs. The solution was elegant in its impossibility. Middle-earth would exist as a dimensional enclave, technically part of Imperial space, but operating under its own laws and maintaining its own culture. Imperial researchers could observe and study, but not intervene or integrate. Middle-earth's population could continue their development, but with absolute prohibition on sharing their techniques or philosophy with Imperial personnel. Essentially, Admiral Kastner summarized, you're offering to become a museum of human development for Imperial study. We're offering to become a living library, Aragorn corrected. Your empire may someday need to remember what human civilization looks like when it chooses cooperation over conquest. When that day comes, we will be here. The negotiations concluded with the Treaty of Arda, the first formal agreement in Imperial history between the Imperium and a human population that maintained political independence. The treaty established protocols so complex that they required their own bureaucratic department within the administratum. Research Station Alpha became a unique institution, an Imperial facility dedicated to studying Imperial alternatives. The research protocols were necessarily unprecedented. How do you study a civilization without contaminating it? How do you learn from people whose knowledge can't be separated from their way of life? The solution involved the development of observation anthropology, pure research with no integration or application requirements. For the first time in Imperial history, knowledge was gathered simply to understand rather than to exploit. The initial research findings revolutionized Imperial understanding of human potential. Middle-earth's technological achievements operated on principles that complemented rather than competed with Imperial technology. Their manufacturing techniques enhanced efficiency without requiring cultural conversion. Their agricultural methods improved planetary sustainability without reducing productivity. Most significantly, their social stability techniques could potentially address the chronic problems that plagued Imperial worlds: rebellion, heresy, administrative corruption, and social breakdown. Magos, reported Chief Researcher Valdus after his first year of observation studies, their conflict resolution protocols achieve 99.7% success rates in preventing violent escalation. Their governmental efficiency exceeds Imperial standards by factors we can't calculate. Their population happiness indices are literally off our measurement scales. Can these techniques be extracted and applied to Imperial worlds? Unknown. The techniques appear to be fundamentally integrated with their philosophical frameworks. Attempting to apply their methods without their worldview might produce superficial changes that collapse under pressure. The paradox of Middle-earth's success became the central challenge of Imperial research. They had achieved everything the Imperium claimed to want, but through methods the Imperium couldn't adopt without ceasing to be the Imperium. 3 years into the research project, I submitted my preliminary findings to Segmentum Command. The report's conclusions were simultaneously encouraging and terrifying. Middle-earth proved that human civilization could achieve unprecedented success, but only by abandoning the assumptions that made Imperial civilization possible. The fundamental question, I wrote in my summary analysis, is whether the Imperium can learn from Middle-earth without becoming Middle-earth. Current evidence suggests the two approaches are mutually exclusive. The response from Terra arrived 6 months later in the form of Inquisitor Lord Vex of the Ordo Hereticus, accompanied by a full investigation team tasked with determining whether Research Station Alpha represented legitimate scientific inquiry or dangerous heretical contamination. Magos Tolkienus, Inquisitor Vex announced during our initial interview, you have submitted reports claiming that Imperial doctrine might be fundamentally flawed. Explain why this doesn't constitute heretical thinking. Inquisitor, scientific observation requires the consideration of all possibilities. Middle-earth exists as objective proof that alternative human development is possible. Denying this evidence would constitute willful ignorance rather than faithful service. And if this evidence suggests that the Emperor's vision was incorrect, the question struck at the heart of my 3-century crisis of understanding. Inquisitor, the evidence suggests that the Emperor's vision was incomplete rather than incorrect. Middle-earth achieved what the Emperor attempted through different methods. Perhaps both approaches served the Emperor's ultimate goal of human advancement. The investigation that followed lasted 18 months and nearly resulted in the termination of the entire research project. Inquisitor Vex's team conducted exhaustive psychological evaluations of every Imperial researcher, searching for signs of ideological contamination or heretical thinking. What they found challenged their own assumptions about heresy and orthodoxy. Rather than being corrupted by exposure to Middle-earth's philosophy, Imperial researchers had developed enhanced resistance to actual chaos corruption. Contact with genuinely hopeful worldviews appeared to strengthen rather than weaken Imperial faith. This is unprecedented, Inquisitor Vex admitted during our final interview. Exposure to alternative human philosophies typically leads to doubt and potential heresy. Instead, your research team shows improved psychological stability and enhanced loyalty to the Emperor's ultimate goals. Perhaps, Inquisitor, because Middle-earth represents the successful achievement of those goals rather than a challenge to them. The investigation concluded with an unprecedented recommendation. Research Station Alpha would be granted permanent status as an Imperial institution, with expanded funding and enhanced security protocols. Middle-earth would remain under Imperial protection as a living laboratory for studying the full potential of human civilization. The decision established a precedent that would reshape Imperial policy for millennia. Not every human world needed to be identical to be part of the Imperium. Diversity of approach could serve unity of purpose. As I composed my final report on the first phase of Middle-earth research, I realized that both civilizations had achieved something unprecedented. They had found a way to coexist despite fundamental incompatibilities. The grim darkness of the far future had encountered something it had never faced before, a darkness that chose to become light without trying to illuminate everything else. Chapter 6. Living in the Space. Between 5 years after the Treaty of Arda, Research Station Alpha had evolved into something unprecedented in Imperial history. A permanent interface between incompatible worldviews that somehow strengthened both rather than destroying either. The transformation hadn't been immediate or easy. The first 2 years involved constant crises as Imperial personnel struggled to maintain research objectivity while studying a civilization that challenged every assumption about human nature. The psychological strain of observing functional peace while serving an empire built on perpetual war created what our medics classified as paradigm dissociation syndrome, a condition unknown to Imperial medicine, because no Imperial citizen had ever faced such fundamental cognitive contradiction. The solution came from an unexpected source, Middle-earth itself. "Your researchers are suffering," King Aragorn observed during one of our monthly diplomatic communications. "They're trying to understand our way of life while maintaining your way of thinking. These approaches are incompatible, but the problem is solvable." "Explain your proposal," I requested through the communication array. "Create a buffer zone. Train a specialized core of Imperial personnel to think partially in our terms while remaining loyal to your ultimate goals. They become translators between our civilizations, people who can understand both worldviews without fully belonging to either." The concept violated every Imperial protocol for personnel management. Creating individuals who operated outside standard Imperial thinking patterns was precisely the kind of ideological contamination the Inquisition existed to prevent. Yet the alternative was losing access to the most valuable research opportunity in Imperial history. Admiral Kastner, now permanently assigned as liaison commander for what had become officially designated as Sector Arda, made the decision that would define his legacy. "We'll create a new branch of the Imperial Service, personnel specifically trained to interface with alternative human civilizations while maintaining Imperial loyalty." The Adeptus Xenologicus had existed for millennia to study alien civilizations. The newly created Adeptus Alternatus would study human civilizations that had developed along non-Imperial lines. The philosophical implications were staggering. The Imperium was officially acknowledging that humanity could develop in ways that remained human while becoming alien to Imperial understanding. I was appointed as the first Magos Prime of the Adeptus Alternatus, tasked with developing protocols for studying human alternatives without corrupting Imperial personnel or destroying the civilizations under study. The training protocols we developed pushed Imperial education beyond any previous boundaries. Candidate personnel underwent 5 years of preparation that included intensive study of non-Imperial philosophy, carefully controlled exposure to alternative social structures, and psychological conditioning designed to maintain Imperial loyalty while enabling cognitive flexibility. The first graduating class of alternative cultural specialists represented something new in Imperial service. Imperial citizens who could think like non-Imperial humans while remaining Imperial humans. The research breakthroughs that followed revolutionized Imperial understanding of human potential across dozens of critical areas. Agricultural specialist Prime Hendrix discovered that Middle-earth's farming techniques could increase Imperial agricultural output by 340% while reducing environmental degradation to essentially zero. The techniques required no advanced technology, only a different relationship between farmers and their land. "They don't fight their environment," Hendrix reported. "They cooperate with it. Instead of forcing the land to produce what they want, they work with natural systems to achieve better results than force could provide." Manufacturing specialist Prime Torres found that Middle-earth's craftsmanship principles could enhance Imperial production quality by factors that approached the theoretical limits of materials science. Again, the improvements required no new technology, only a different approach to the work itself. "They treat manufacturing as a form of artistic expression," Torres explained. "Each item is created with personal investment and emotional connection. The psychological engagement somehow translates into objective improvements in structural integrity, durability, and performance. Most significantly, social structure specialist Prime Chen discovered that Middle-earth's governmental principles could potentially solve the chronic administrative problems that plagued Imperial worlds throughout the galaxy. They've achieved something the Administratum has attempted for 10 millennia, Chen reported. Government that serves the population rather than controlling it, combined with population loyalty that strengthens rather than challenges governmental authority. The implications were revolutionary. If Middle-earth's techniques could be adapted for Imperial use, the Imperium could potentially achieve unprecedented efficiency, stability, and population satisfaction without abandoning its core mission of human unity and protection. The question was whether such adaptation was possible without fundamental transformation of Imperial character. The answer came through an experimental program that pushed Imperial flexibility to its absolute limits. The Arda Integration Project. Working with volunteers from Imperial worlds suffering chronic instability, we began carefully implementing modified versions of Middle-earth's social techniques. The modifications were designed to achieve Middle-earth's results while maintaining Imperial structures and loyalty. The first test world was 40K'S, a planet devastated by constant rebellions and administrative failure. Standard Imperial responses had only worsened the situation over 3 centuries. The world was scheduled for exterminatus when Admiral Kastner proposed using it as a testing ground for alternative cultural techniques. The integration process took 27 years and required constant monitoring to prevent either cultural contamination or integration failure. The results defied every prediction in Imperial social science. 40K'S achieved complete social stability within a single generation. Rebellion rates dropped to 0. Administrative efficiency improved by orders of magnitude. Population satisfaction reached levels comparable to the most successful Imperial worlds. Most remarkably, Imperial loyalty actually increased rather than decreased. The population's enhanced quality of life made them genuinely grateful for Imperial protection rather than resentful of Imperial control. They understand, perhaps for the first time, what the Imperium is trying to achieve, reported Governor Militant Vex after completing his assessment of the 40K'S project. Previous Imperial control maintained order through fear and force. The new approach maintains order through hope and cooperation. The result is a population that chooses Imperial loyalty rather than accepting it as an unavoidable burden. The success of 40K'S led to the authorization of similar projects on 47 additional worlds. Each adaptation was carefully customized to local conditions while maintaining core Imperial requirements. The results consistently exceeded expectations. Meanwhile, Middle-earth itself had undergone its own evolution. 5 years of Imperial observation had taught them lessons about galactic civilization that enhanced their own development. Without abandoning their core principles, they had developed new techniques for maintaining cultural integrity while interacting with fundamentally different civilizations. "We have learned much from watching you learn about us," King Aragorn noted during our 5th anniversary diplomatic meeting. "Your struggle to understand our ways has taught us things about our own ways that we never recognized." The relationship had become genuinely symbiotic. Imperial research enhanced Middle-earth's self-understanding, while Middle-earth's example enhanced Imperial development possibilities. By the end of the 5th year, both civilizations had achieved something unprecedented in galactic history. They had found a way to grow stronger through contact with incompatible alternatives rather than weaker through compromise or conquest. The model Arda protocols, as they became known throughout the Imperium, established a new paradigm for Imperial expansion. Not every human world needed to be conquered and transformed. Some worlds could serve the Imperium more effectively by remaining different, providing examples of alternative approaches that could enhance Imperial effectiveness without requiring Imperial transformation. The establishment of the Adeptus Alternatus as a permanent Imperial institution marked a fundamental shift in Imperial philosophy. For the first time since the Great Crusade, the Imperium officially acknowledged that there might be multiple valid approaches to achieving human advancement and protection. As I composed my comprehensive report on the first 5 years of alternative cultural studies, I realized that Middle-earth had accomplished something that 10,000 years of imperial expansion had failed to achieve. It had taught the Imperium how to grow stronger through diversity rather than uniformity. The grim darkness of the far future had discovered that light and darkness could coexist in ways that enhanced both, rather than cancelling each other out. The question now was whether this discovery could spread throughout the galaxy without destroying the very structures that made it possible. Chapter 7. The Ripple Effect. 15 years after first contact, the effects of the Middle-earth protocols had propagated through Imperial space in ways that no one had predicted or planned. What began as a carefully controlled research project had evolved into a paradigm shift that was reshaping Imperial civilization across entire sectors. The transformation hadn't followed any pattern in Imperial historical precedent. Previous changes in Imperial policy had always been imposed from above through the hierarchical command structure. The Middle-earth influence spread differently, through voluntary adoption by Imperial personnel who had witnessed the effectiveness of alternative approaches and chosen to implement modified versions within their own jurisdictions. I first became aware of the phenomenon when my routine analysis of Imperial administrative reports revealed statistical anomalies that defied explanation. Dozens of worlds throughout the segmentum were showing unprecedented improvements in governmental efficiency, population satisfaction, and economic productivity. Improvements that had no apparent connection to Middle-earth research or Adeptus Alternatus operations. Investigation revealed that former Research Station Alpha personnel had been reassigned throughout Imperial space, carrying with them informal knowledge of techniques they had observed during their service. Without official authorization or institutional support, they were quietly implementing modified Middle-earth principles within their new assignments. "They're not following orders," reported Inquisitor Vex during his investigation of the unauthorized implementations. "They're following examples. The personnel who served at Research Station Alpha have seen proof that alternative approaches work. Now they're adapting those approaches to their current assignments." The phenomenon represented something unprecedented in Imperial administration: bottom-up change rather than top-down command. Imperial personnel were choosing to adopt new methods not because they were ordered to, but because they had witnessed superior results. More disturbing from an orthodox perspective, the unauthorized implementations were achieving better results than official Imperial methods. Governor Marcus Chen of Hive World Tertius had quietly implemented modified consensus-building techniques in his planetary administration. Within 5 years, his world had achieved the highest administrative efficiency ratings in the sector, while maintaining complete Imperial compliance. Colonel Sarah Voss had adapted Middle-earth conflict resolution principles for use within her regiment. Her unit achieved unprecedented morale ratings and combat effectiveness, while maintaining perfect disciplinary records. Even Tech Priest Valdus had begun incorporating Middle-earth craftsmanship philosophy into his Forge World operations, achieving manufacturing quality improvements that exceeded Mechanicus standard specifications. Each individual implementation was small, carefully disguised within official Imperial procedures, and designed to enhance rather than challenge Imperial effectiveness. Collectively, they represented a grassroots transformation of Imperial methodology that was spreading faster than official policy could track or control. "We're facing a choice," Admiral Kastner reported during an emergency command conference. "We can attempt to suppress these unauthorized implementations and return to standard procedures, or we can officially recognize what's already happening and develop proper oversight protocols." The choice carried implications that reached to the highest levels of Imperial authority. Suppressing the unauthorized implementations would require acknowledging that they were working better than official Imperial methods, an admission that would undermine confidence in Imperial doctrine. Officially recognizing them would require admitting that fundamental Imperial procedures needed improvement, an admission that approached heretical thinking. The decision came from an unexpected source, the Adeptus Custodes. Captain General Trajan Valoris himself transmitted the directive that would reshape Imperial policy for millennia. "The Emperor's ultimate goal is human advancement and protection. Any method that serves this goal more effectively than current methods serves the Emperor more faithfully than rigid adherence to outdated procedures. The Imperial Decree 847 M41 officially authorized the systematic study and implementation of enhanced imperial methodologies based on successful alternative human development patterns. The Adeptus Alternatus was expanded from a research organization into an operational branch of imperial government, tasked with adapting successful alternative techniques for imperial use. The expansion required the development of new institutional frameworks that pushed imperial bureaucracy beyond its traditional boundaries. The Administratum created the Department of Methodological Enhancement to track and evaluate unauthorized implementations. The Commissariat established new protocols for maintaining loyalty while encouraging innovation. Even the Inquisition developed new criteria for distinguishing between dangerous heresy and beneficial adaptation. Within 5 years of official authorization, the enhanced imperial methodologies had been implemented on over 200 worlds. The results consistently exceeded expectations while maintaining complete imperial compliance and loyalty. The success of the enhanced methodologies led to increased interest in discovering other examples of successful alternative human development. Explorator fleets began actively searching for human worlds that had achieved stability and prosperity through non-imperial means, rather than simply cataloguing worlds for conquest. The discoveries revolutionized imperial understanding of human potential. Throughout the galaxy, isolated human populations had developed dozens of different approaches to civilization, many of which achieved results that exceeded imperial standards in specific areas. Forge World Prometheus had independently developed manufacturing techniques that produced superior weapons through meditation-based craftsmanship. Agricultural World Demeter had achieved food production rates that exceeded Agri-World standards through symbiotic farming methods. Fortress World Sparta had developed training protocols that produced warriors of exceptional skill through honor-based discipline systems. Each discovery provided new insights into human potential and new techniques for enhancing imperial effectiveness. The Adeptus Alternatus evolved from studying one alternative civilization to coordinating a galaxy-wide network of human development research. But the most significant development wasn't the discovery of new techniques. It was the emergence of a new imperial philosophy that embraced diversity as a source of strength rather than a threat to unity. We have learned that human unity doesn't require human uniformity, I wrote in my comprehensive analysis of the first 15 years of alternative cultural studies. The Imperium can maintain its essential character while incorporating the best achievements of alternative human development. The philosophical shift had practical implications that reached every aspect of imperial operation. Recruitment protocols began evaluating candidates based on their ability to contribute unique perspectives rather than their conformity to standard patterns. Training programs began emphasizing adaptive thinking alongside traditional discipline. Even the Space Marines began experimenting with techniques that enhance their effectiveness through philosophical development rather than purely physical enhancement. The transformation wasn't universal or complete. Large portions of the Imperium continued to operate according to traditional methods, either by choice or necessity. But the existence of successful alternatives had permanently changed Imperial understanding of what was possible. Middle-earth itself had become something like the capital of alternative human development, a living laboratory where researchers from throughout the galaxy came to study the full potential of human civilization. The Treaty of Arda had been expanded multiple times to accommodate increasing research demands while maintaining the planet's cultural integrity. "We have become teachers without choosing to teach," King Aragorn observed during our 15th anniversary diplomatic meeting. "Your empire's hunger for knowledge has made us a center of learning for the entire galaxy." The transformation of Middle-earth's role from isolated curiosity to galactic resource had required careful management to prevent cultural contamination or exploitation. The enhanced preservation protocols established strict limits on research access while ensuring that Middle-earth's insights remained available for Imperial development. As I completed my analysis of 15 years of alternative cultural research, I realized that both civilizations had achieved something unprecedented in galactic history. They had found a way to maintain their essential characters while growing stronger through contact with fundamental alternatives. The Imperium had learned that effectiveness could be enhanced through diversity rather than uniformity. Middle-earth had learned that influence could be exercised through example rather than conquest. The grim darkness of the far future had discovered that evolution was possible, even for civilizations that seemed permanently fixed in their patterns. The question for the next phase of development was whether these lessons could spread throughout the galaxy without triggering the kind of massive upheaval that had historically destroyed civilizations attempting fundamental change. While official Imperial attention focused on the documented implementations of enhanced Imperial methodologies, a far more significant transformation was occurring beneath the notice of most Imperial oversight. The unauthorized implementations had evolved into what could only be described as an underground revolution, not against Imperial authority, but in favor of Imperial effectiveness. The phenomenon had begun with individual Imperial personnel making small modifications to standard procedures based on techniques they had observed during alternative cultural training. Within a decade, these individual modifications had coalesced into informal networks of Imperial servants who shared successful adaptations while maintaining complete operational security. "We're not changing Imperial law," explained Commander Sarah Chen during a covert meeting of enhanced methodology practitioners on Forge World Tertius. "We're proving that Imperial law works better when it's applied with wisdom rather than rigid adherence to tradition." The underground networks operated through carefully established protocols that avoided triggering Inquisition attention while maximizing the spread of effective techniques. Rather than formal organization, they relied on personal relationships and professional respect to identify trustworthy candidates for enhancement training. Most remarkably, the underground revolution was achieving results that exceeded official enhanced methodology implementations. The informal networks were more flexible, more adaptive, and more responsive to local conditions than institutional programs constrained by bureaucratic oversight. The Commissariat crisis, the success of underground enhanced methodologies, created an unprecedented crisis within the Commissariat. Commissars trained to maintain discipline through fear and punishment found themselves assigned to units that had achieved superior discipline through voluntary commitment and mutual respect. "My regiment no longer requires traditional disciplinary measures," reported Commissar Vex during the confidential briefing that would reshape Commissariat doctrine. "They maintain perfect order, not because they fear punishment, but because they understand the importance of their mission and respect their officers' leadership." The traditional Commissariat response would have been to reimpose strict disciplinary measures to maintain proper Imperial authority. However, the units using enhanced methodologies were achieving superior combat effectiveness while maintaining complete Imperial loyalty. Destroying their effectiveness to maintain traditional authority would serve no Imperial purpose. The solution required the development of new Commissariat protocols that had never been necessary in Imperial history. How to maintain oversight of units that no longer required external discipline. "We are becoming advisors rather than enforcers," explained Lord Commissar Gaunt during the historic Commissariat Council that established the new protocols. "Our role shifts from preventing failure to facilitating success." The enhanced Commissariat protocols represented a fundamental evolution in Imperial military organization. Rather than maintaining order through fear, enhanced commissars fostered order through understanding. Rather than preventing heresy through punishment, they prevented heresy through education. Most significantly, the enhanced commissariat techniques proved more effective at identifying actual threats than traditional methods. Units with genuine morale and voluntary commitment were more likely to report suspicious activity, more resistant to chaos corruption, and more effective at maintaining security. The planetary governor evolution. The success of enhanced Imperial methodologies at the unit level began to attract attention from planetary governors seeking solutions to chronic administrative problems. Standard Imperial governance relied on authoritarian control backed by military force, an approach that maintained order, but often at the cost of efficiency and population satisfaction. Governor Marcus Aurelius of Hive World Prima was the first to officially request enhanced methodology training for his administrative staff. His world had been plagued by constant low-level rebellion, administrative corruption, and economic stagnation, despite complete military control. Traditional imperial governance maintains order, Governor Aurelius explained during his request for alternative cultural assistance. But it doesn't create prosperity, prevent corruption, or foster genuine loyalty. I need techniques that achieve imperial goals more effectively than imperial methods. The implementation of enhanced governance methodologies on Prima took 3 years and required careful coordination with multiple imperial institutions to avoid triggering oversight protocols designed to prevent governmental deviation. The results exceeded every expectation in imperial administrative science. Within 5 years, Prima had achieved the highest administrative efficiency ratings in the sector while maintaining complete imperial compliance. Corruption rates dropped to near zero. Population satisfaction reached levels previously considered impossible on hive worlds. Economic productivity increased by factors that approached theoretical maximums. More importantly, Prima's success attracted attention from dozens of other planetary governors throughout the sector. The techniques spread through informal networks of administrative personnel who shared successful adaptations while maintaining careful operational security. The Mechanicus integration. The underground spread of enhanced methodologies had particular impact within the Adeptus Mechanicus, where the integration of middle-earth craftsmanship philosophy with traditional tech priest training produced innovations that exceeded official expectations. Tech priest Valdus had begun experimenting with emotional investment techniques in his forge operations without official authorization. Rather than treating manufactured items as mere objects, his teams were trained to develop personal connections with their work, an approach that bordered on heretical thinking, according to traditional Mechanicus doctrine. The results were impossible to dismiss. Equipment produced through emotionally invested craftsmanship showed superior performance characteristics that could not be explained through technical analysis. Weapons were more accurate, armor provided better protection, and vehicles showed enhanced reliability. The machine spirits respond to the emotional state of their creators. Valdus reported during his unofficial briefing to other tech priests interested in enhanced methodologies. Items created with genuine care and personal investment develop superior operational characteristics. The discovery that emotional investment enhanced rather than compromised technical effectiveness challenged fundamental Mechanicus assumptions about the relationship between flesh and machine. Rather than being weakness that needed to be purged, emotion appeared to be a tool that could enhance technological capability. The implications spread through underground Mechanicus networks with remarkable speed. Within 5 years, dozens of forge worlds were quietly implementing emotional investment techniques while maintaining complete compliance with official Mechanicus doctrine. The Inquisition paradox. The success of underground enhanced methodologies created an unprecedented paradox for the Inquisition. Traditional Inquisition doctrine required the investigation and potential suppression of any unauthorized deviation from imperial procedure. However, the enhanced methodologies were achieving superior imperial compliance while strengthening rather than weakening resistance to actual heretical threats. Inquisitor Helena Voss found herself investigating a regiment that had implemented enhanced methodologies without authorization. Her investigation revealed that the regiment showed perfect discipline, superior combat effectiveness, enhanced loyalty to the Emperor, and unprecedented resistance to chaos corruption. They are more imperial than standard imperial units, Voss reported during her confidential briefing to the Ordo Hereticus. Their deviation from procedure has enhanced, rather than compromised, their service to the Emperor. Traditional heresy protocols do not apply to improvements that serve imperial goals more effectively than standard methods. The Inquisition response required the development of new investigative protocols that could distinguish between dangerous deviation and beneficial adaptation. Rather than suppressing all unauthorized changes, inquisitors began evaluating changes based on their effectiveness in serving imperial goals. The Enhanced Inquisition protocols represented a fundamental evolution in imperial oversight. Rather than preventing change, Enhanced Inquisitors fostered beneficial change while preventing harmful deviation. The Ecclesiastical Awakening. The underground spread of enhanced methodologies had profound implications for the imperial cult. Populations using enhanced methodologies showed unprecedented levels of genuine faith rather than forced compliance with religious doctrine.